When children first start writing, they often don't match every sound with a letter. Sometimes they seem to be using letters to stand for syllables rather than individual sounds, as in this example from an English-speaking child. In this example, the letter I stands for the word I, L stands for the single syllable word love, T stands for the single syllable word to, P stands for play, U stands for with, my does stand for my, and TO together stands for toys. Another thing that we can notice about this example is that there are no spaces to indicate where one word ends and another one begins. This is typical of children's early writing, but it's also typical of the way we actually speak. We don't pronounce each word with a pause after it. So in a way, this way of writing is actually closer to how language is perceived and produced in speech than the convention of writing words with spaces to mark word boundaries. All languages have spelling conventions that tell you how to match up letters of the alphabet with the speech sounds of that language. In some languages, these conventions are more straightforward than in others. For example, Finnish and Italian come quite close to having just a single way of spelling each sound, and just one possible sound for each letter. We know that in English, the spelling conventions are quite complex. There are a number of different ways of spelling the same sound, and often several possible sounds for a single letter. For this reason, it generally takes children who are learning to write English quite a while to learn to spell correctly. However, the mistakes children make in spelling are not random. They typically give a good representation of how a word is actually pronounced. Look at the following example, which was written by a 6-year-old. In roller skating, we know that the sequence LU is used to spell the same set of sounds in other words such as lunch. SC is used to write the sounds sk in other words such as scarf. So both of these words actually follow English spelling conventions. They're just not the conventions required for these particular words. In beated, the letter B is being used to stand for the syllable B, which is not surprising given that this is how we actually name the letter when we talk about it. If we look at tripped, we can notice that the sound at the end of the word tripped isn't actually a d, a voiced alveolar stop. We don't say tripped. This is actually very difficult to even pronounce. We say tripped with a T sound at the end. So this child is in fact giving a very accurate representation of how the word is actually pronounced. For after, if we look at words like car or r, we'll see that the vowel sound r is actually spelled as AR in these words. So it's not surprising that the child spells it the same way here. Finally, the word home doesn't actually have an e or e sound at the end. So again, there is a good reason why the child is leaving the spelling, the letter e, out. If we look at it this way, then we see that children's spelling errors can actually tell us quite a bit about how well the child understands the relationship between speech and writing. This child in fact has a fairly sophisticated grasp of the conventions that underlie English spelling. All her spellings are phonetically motivated and in most cases are a possible way of spelling the sounds in question in some English words. What she needs is mainly to learn that there are different ways of spelling the same sounds in different words, and to learn which words are supposed to have which spelling. But she clearly understands that letters are representations of speech sounds, and has a good idea of which letters are used to represent which sounds. As we could see from the word beated, one guide that children typically use when they try to spell a word is the names of letters. Usually this is a good guide, because the name of a letter nearly always contains the sound the letter refers to. So B, the name of the letter, has the sound B in it. But there are a few letters whose names in English don't actually contain the sound that the letter is used to represent. For example, the letter W is used for the sound W, but is called W, a name that doesn't have a W sound in it. The letter Y is typically used for the Y sound, as in yellow, but the name of the letter is Y, which doesn't have a Y sound in it. Because of that, children sometimes use this letter for the sound W, as in Y-E-N, for when. In the same way, the letter H is sometimes used to write the affricate ch, as in T-E-H-R, for teacher. Often, sounds that are spelt with a combination of two letters, what we call a digraph, are written with only one of the letters in children's early spelling. So we have, for example, F-I-H for fish, with the H representing the sh sound. S-O-S for shoes, with in this case the S representing the sh sound. It's very common for children to perceive the sound sequences to r as tr and dr as dr. Again, this is quite close to how we actually pronounce them. It's very hard to say a word like tree without turning the t into a ch-like sound. Because of this, we frequently see spellings like this for troubles, or like this for dragon. Children also frequently leave out a nasal consonant when it comes before a stop that is made in the same place of articulation. So when an a bilabial nasal, comes before the bilabial stops p and b, the may be left out, as in lap for lamp. When an alveolar nasal, comes before the alveolar stops t and d, it is also often left out, as in ad for and, or this one for went. When an N comes before a G or a K in English spelling, it usually doesn't stand for an N sound, but for the velar nasal ng, as in sink or finger, not sink or finger. So what we have is a velar nasal which comes before a velar stop. And again, children often leave the letter N out in such cases, so we get things like D-O-K-K-E for donkey, or J-A-G-L for jungle. Vowels are a particularly problematic aspect of English spelling. Long vowels are reasonably consistent, so we see spellings like these. Just the letter A saying its name in words like played, and similar examples for the letters I, as in 9, and O, as in home. Short vowels are rather more complicated, but these are some typical spellings. E for short air, as in eggs. The letter E for short I, as in silly. O for short O, as in was. And A for short U-ah, as in fussy. You can see that these spellings are quite close to how the word is actually pronounced, so there are good reasons why children spell words in this way. But when you combine all these different phonetic spellings, children's spelling often ends up looking very different from that used by adults. Take a look at this example. What does it say? Once a lady went fishing and she caught Flipper. If you look at words like once and caught, it's pretty clear that the conventional spelling isn't necessarily any closer to the actual pronunciation than the children's version. So even though a child may not yet have learned all the complicated spelling conventions of English, it is clear that the mistakes they make are not random. They actually reveal a lot about how well the child understands the relationship between sounds and letters in English.